Hello, and welcome to Blue Collar Wealth Club. I am one of your hosts, Jerry Garcia.
And I'm your other host, Sheena White. Today we want to talk about safety nets. Financial safety nets.
Financial safety nets. Very important.
I mean, we could talk about other types of safety nets. I'm sure that it's relevant in certain aspects of blue collar work.
Cirque du Soleil.
Yes, in Cirque du Soleil, it's very relevant, though they don't really use many safety nets, and that has been an issue.
That's true.
Every so often.
Just proves the point. They're very important.
Right? Okay, so financial safety nets. So a lot of people love to live on the edge. And when I mean the edge of their bank account balance, and just really, spending money as it comes in, or deciding to do or not do things based upon how much money they have in their bank account at that moment. But I don't really think that's a great idea.
I mean, this is not even just in business. I mean, the percentage of Americans who don't have a month's worth of bills saved is like staggering.
Well, I think like the percentage of Americans who don't even have enough money to cover a $500 emergency is staggering.
Right.
Yeah. And that would stress me out. Can you imagine me like that?
No, I cannot.
You're like, I would not be here.
And yet I know that there was a time for both of us. I mean, we've both been there. Look, it's not always easy to create these financial safeguards, but with your business, it has to be part of your planning. Mm-hmm. If you're going to build a business that's sustainable, over the long haul, you have to plan this into your budget. It has to be part of your budget. Otherwise, like you said, a small financial hardship then could derail the entire company and put it under.
Or one check not coming on time.
Yeah.
I see this happen a lot. Like people are like, oh, I'm getting this check and that's how I'm going to pay payroll. It's like, okay, well, what happens if you don't get that check? Well, I'm going to get that check. Like, okay, but.
So we all know people never pay late.
Yeah, never, ever, ever pay late. Everyone pays everything on time.
They've already put that check in the mail.
They might. Oh my God. I laugh because the check is in the mail is, as you all know, listening is the favorite thing people love to say. I actually have one client that they sent prepaid FedEx labels so that they know when it actually is in the mail, which I'm like, Matt, why do you guys? And then I was like, oh, you guys are smart. I like this.
That's actually low key kind of smart.
Yeah, it's low key subversive, right? They're like, oh, hey, here's your prepaid FedEx label for our check.
I like that.
Thanks.
Did they use it?
Well, no, they know exactly when it goes in the mail because it gets scanned by FedEx.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Like,
their clients are using it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so we talk about this. Okay, so the paychecks, you having your business on the edge because you're relying on other people's businesses to pay you on time, when the reality is the majority of those businesses are also living on the edge, and they're waiting for paychecks from other people.
Yeah, I'm getting actually a little stressed out just having this conversation. No, because I know it's, we can fix it, right? It's all about allocation and really planning ahead and projecting, because so many times people want to grow, but you can't necessarily grow with the money that you have right in front of you. So say you have a job and you get a big check. You have to first know where that money needs to go. Did you pay your suppliers, right away? Are you setting money aside for your next payroll? Things like that. Are we setting money aside for future growth? Really being strategic and being intentional about where you're putting that money, right? What are you doing with it? So in Great by Choice by Jim Collins, he talks about Microsoft in one of the chapters that I can't remember the name of the chapter, but it's all about basically being kind of a little miserly with your money, but being very specific about that. But he talks about Microsoft, and when Bill Gates was at the helm, they had 12 months cash reserves at all times. So Bill Gates just stepped down not that long ago. Okay. So let's think about that for 10 seconds. That large of a company, 12 months cash reserves at all times. That's a ton of money.
That's a lot.
Millions and millions and millions of dollars. Yeah. That's like more money than I can even like.
It's tens of millions.
Tens of maybe hundreds of millions of dollars.
And that's, reserves, meaning if they brought in not a single dime that entire 12 months, that company would still keep running as if nothing happened.
Exactly. Yeah.
Every person will be paid. Every
buyer, every vendor. Yeah.
Every piece of software would still be up there, out, maintenance. Everything would still be accounted for as if nothing happened.
Yeah, 12 months.
Now, that's the extreme.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Yes, this is the extreme. But that's why it's a good example, because it's like if someone that large and who grew that big of a business made that a priority, there has to be a reason for it. And the reason for it was because he knew that software is a little bit of a scary spot to be sometimes. Sure. Things can happen. You never know. I mean, like NVIDIA stock just took a huge tumble because of some what is that thing called?
It's called DeepSeek.
DeepSeek. I had never heard of this, but all of a sudden NVIDIA stock is like plummeting. I'm like, man, I should buy some. The next day it shot back up. I'm like, crap, I should have bought some. I'm like, man, I knew it. It's still low, but it wasn't as higher than it was 2 days ago.
You couldn't have planned on that, right? The tech industry was taken aback by this Chinese company, DeepSeek, that created an AI model to compete with OpenAI, ChatGPT, all of this stuff, and they did it at a fraction of the cost, and so it sent NVIDIA stock
tumbling. Yeah. And so then NVIDIA's like freaking out, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, now our valuation is in the tank. Like, what are we going to do? All the things. And this happens in tech so much. So Bill Gates, knowing he was in a super volatile industry, was like, look, from the get, we have to have 1 year worth of runway because we're in such a volatile industry. So a whole year might seem crazy when you think about Microsoft today. You can't think about Microsoft today. You have to think about it way back when it was a tiny baby company, right? And in that growth phase, he was very specific because he knew it was so volatile an industry that he wanted to have a much larger runway than the average business would need in order to protect his business. What is one of the reasons that Microsoft has come out on top is because no matter what, they were protected. They had this runway. So in that volatility, they were able to withstand all those hits that have happened in the industry over the past, 40 years versus other companies that we don't remember their name because they don't exist any longer because they couldn't handle it. They didn't have the cash to weather the storms.
Well, yeah, especially in tech, there are times when you're going to have to make a pivot. Something changes. You need to have the ability to take that hit to revenue, make the adjustments you need, whether it's, on the research development side, you got to start doing whatever it is that's come onto the floor as the new tech that you don't have yet and work your way into that battle as well. So having those cash reserves is hugely important. Now you can think of how this applies in, if you're trying to grow your service-based business, it's the same thing. You want to start taking on bigger jobs. Those bigger jobs come with longer periods between paychecks from those jobs. And so you have to be able to sustain your payroll, be able to continue purchasing supplies, be able to continue running your business behind the scenes while you're taking on these bigger, better jobs. And, if you're buying equipment that has loans on it, all of this stuff, as you grow, it's not linear. Not everything happens in a straight line. As you grow, sometimes that overhead shoots way up, and the amount of time you have to float between paychecks is huge. Now, those checks, when they come in, are huge, but if you're not properly allocating, you're saying, great, I just got this big check, we're going to pay off this piece of equipment, and now we're good. But guess what? When you don't have another paycheck coming for a couple months and you have to keep paying your guys, it becomes a problem.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. A big, big, big problem. And you need to really look at things, what is your overhead allocation to that big project? Because, I see so many people just, kind of funneling money around, and sometimes you don't have a choice, but every place that you're in is because of decisions you made in the past. And so I've had companies where I could see that it was a year ago decisions that are catching up to them. I've had one that it was literally stuff that they started doing I could trace it back in their books 3.5 years ago. And I'm like, yeah, the piper is getting paid now. Like, this is a problem. You're feeling the pinch today, but this problem, this issue started in your finances started 3.5 years ago. And you just kept letting it go, and it just assumed this huge thing. But anything you're feeling has to do with the decisions you've made. And so you want to make and then getting out of it is just making different decisions and starting to create those financial safety nets. Like for me, I get super itchy if I have less than 6 months reserves. I get like super stressed. He can tell you, but that's today, right? But like previously,
I can only tell you from what I guess it would be, because we've never had less than 6 months reserves.
We have,
maybe.
Yeah, because we, it started, it was like a month, and then 2 months, and then 3 months. I don't ever want to go backwards, right? Like 6 months is like when we get, that's like, it makes me feel like solid, like can like be calm-ish, and the ish, I put the ish in there. So you just start with like focusing on, okay, how do we sock away a little bit here and there? How do we pull off just a couple percentage points? Like I see sometimes people are like, okay, the next big check, we're gonna put the whole thing in. Like, no, it's not a one day thing to start to do this. It takes time. Like, okay, yeah, I can talk about right now, 6 months, but that's like, I mean, I've been in my business full time for 3.5 years now. When I first started, it was like barely 2 weeks. Like I was like, oh, I gotta get those checks tomorrow, But now it takes time. So it's like years to get to that 6 months. So, focusing on what can you do today to just start putting stuff aside? What can you do today to start looking at the checks as you get them and say, okay, where does this money need to go? Not just today, but tomorrow. I got a client, we were talking it was earlier this week, man. I was like, a couple weeks ago. No, it was earlier this week. That's the kind of week I've had. Mm-hmm. And I was like, okay, well, we can't, we were getting some money, and I'm like, we can't just look at tomorrow, what we owe, this week. Next week is the first of the month. We have a ton of bills. We have to look at that too. Like, what's happening then? And they were like, oh yeah, thank you. And then we realized we had no extra money for anything.
I mean, short-sightedness, causes so many issues. Mm-hmm. This all applies to personal finances as well.
Oh yeah.
If you get your paycheck in the middle of the month and you're like, sweet, I'm going to spend all this, and then, you don't pay the bills that are due the first of the month, then you have to spend that next check, and you're like, oh, well, this check is not enough to pay my mortgage and my car payment and my insurance that are all due on the first. I probably should have saved half of my last check to prepare for these bills that are coming up. This stuff all applies, and that's why it's important to have goals set, and if you are planning growth, okay, if we're going to grow to this, what does that mean? How is this going to impact our overhead, our cost of goods, to get to that level and start planning ahead for that? Okay, well, if we start, by taking 1% of every job and putting that away towards that, and it slowly grows. Okay, now we've hit this level. Now we can start putting away 1% of this new pay level.
Yes.
And it continues to grow and build on itself. So you get to the level where you do have those reserves. You do have payroll covered. You do have everything that you need to really sustain that growth for the long haul, and not just have this big flash in the pan month where you had a huge month, but then you spent the next 6 months trying to dig out of the hole that was created by not preparing for that buildup.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, and I use, I have a tool that's like a week by week cash flow management tool where we put in every single like set expense that you have on the week that it's coming. And then we look at that, and then we have, like your margin for how much we think payroll is going to be, like averages, and how much we think, your materials are going to be, and things like that. So we can really project out the whole next quarter, especially if we're getting like large checks and then nothing, or, large checks and then small checks, or we really have inconsistent income coming in. So we can better project out and say, okay, if we're getting this check today, how long is our runway? Or we're getting these other ones, like where do we see issues happening? Where do we need to fill in? Or where can we maybe siphon some money off and put it in savings? Or can we siphon some money off and like pay down some other debts, things like that? Or if you do want to like buy that new truck. Okay, can we afford it? So we can plop in the payment. Here's the money down. Here's what the payment would be. Do we see any red here? Because if we see red in the future, well, that's a problem. Like, obviously we can't afford this truck, or we can't afford whatever we're doing. Oh, hey, we want to hire this person. And we could really project out in the future. And I love it because it's real, like it's where we can look forward and we can also adjust as the weeks progress. So then it can be a past actual, a weekly what's happening today, and then a future projection all at the same time. So it really like flows with you through the weeks and gives you that transparency and that foresight of what does my money look like next week and the week after. And you can see how much you need to bring in every single week based upon your average materials, your average payroll, and all your actual bills. Because I see so many people using their P&L, like, did I make money this week? What they don't realize is your P&L is not a cash flow statement. Mm-hmm. Your profit and loss statement does not reflect any debt servicing. So all of your payments to trucks, to anything you bought, like anything you have financed, any of your equipment, none of that hits your P&L. If you have an SBA loan, it doesn't hit your P&L. It's like I have a client right now that if their P&L doesn't show at least $150,000 for the year, that means cash flow wise, they're in the negative because they have a large SBA loan. So they need to be able to pay that, and it just isn't reflected there. So they'll be like, oh, it says I made all this money. What do you mean? I have no money in my account. It's like, well, right, you only made 80,000, not 150. So that's a problem. that's cash flow negative.
Well, that's why understanding those types of financial reports is important. And if you don't understand them, having somebody who can explain to you, because like you said, you may look at this P&L and say, great, we have an extra 80K, not realizing that it's not accounting for any of those payments. Mm-mm. And realistically, you're under 70,000 and you're losing money right now. Mm-hmm. And, that's why it's important to have advisors to be able to help you plan that growth. And somebody like yourself is hugely important and invaluable to be able to plan that growth in such a way that it's going to actually work. Because for most people, planning growth, unfortunately, is just, okay, well, let's just get more revenue. Let's get more sales in. Let's spend more money on our marketing or whatever. And, they're not spending that marketing money in the right areas because they're not tracking where the majority of their sales are coming from, which referral source. Is it coming from Google, pay, click to pay, or pay-per-click, that's what it's called. Is it coming from Facebook ads? Is it coming from, billboards? Is it coming from your magazine ads or whatever? If you're not tracking which one of these is working the best, you're just throwing stuff at the wall and hoping that it sticks. Mm-hmm. And that's why having a consultant, somebody to help you out, is actually very important for helping you track the things that are working so you can crank up the right things without spending money blindly, and then know that just cranking up that money is not enough to grow. Yes, you'll get more revenue in, but then you're like, oh crap, now we're backlogged. Now I need to hire somebody, not knowing if, what the appropriate pay is for that person to keep you profitable, and if it's even within reason for you to do so.
Yeah, I mean, everybody. So I have another tool that is called the Power of One that gives us what's called the 7 levers of cash, and I put people's actual info into it, and then it gives us what 1% change in all these 7 areas would give us in terms of our cash flow and our profitability. And people always want to go to volume. I'll just sell more. But generally speaking, volume has one of the lowest impacts on your actual cash flow and profitability. Price is always, well, generally speaking, sometimes it's not, but most of the time it's number one, because price directly increases your bottom line because you have no extra costs, doing the same thing, you're just making more. So price is a direct impact. If you just increase your prices 5%, boom, there you go.
Increase your conversions.
I mean, increasing conversions too, but that goes to volume.
Sure.
So, I mean, you don't have to spend more on marketing when you increase conversions, but you still have to spend more to produce it and stuff like that. So, and then cost of goods sold management, inventory management, what's your accounts payable, your accounts receivable, your inventory, all these things impact your cash, right? If you have a ton of inventory, if you have a ton of material just sitting there, that is, you paid for it, right? Or you owe on it one way or
You
another.
borrowed for it.
You
Yeah.
borrowed for it, like one way or another, you have it, and it's just sitting there, and that's what's called working capital. It's money that is held in your business that you don't have access to. I always call it money in other people's bank accounts.
Right.
And that's the thing. So all of your inventory, if you have too much of it, you really need to offload it. Your accounts receivable, making sure you're getting those checks on time. And then just looking at all these different things, your accounts payable, are you paying your suppliers directly, but you're not getting paid net 30. So you're upfronting all these costs for the job and then getting paid 30 days later. Can we get on terms? There's a ton of different ways to work that, but just making sure, like, even if you are paying up front and you are like fronting all this working capital, that you still have that amount to actually spend. Growth is super expensive. People always want to grow, but they forget that growth costs money. It's not free. And so you have to have those financial safety nets in place, and you have to have that financial acumen to be able to grow in a way that's sustainable so that you don't grow broke.
Right. And if growing is your main objective, you have to decide what's more important, right? Because sometimes that growth might mean that you're taking in less personally into your own pocket for a while that growth is taking place, while you're paying to implement all these things, while you're paying the additional staff, while you're paying for additional materials or whatever the thing may be. There may be a period where your personal income is hit in a negative way during that growth period. And you have to decide if you're capable of making that sacrifice, if that sacrifice is worth it for you. You have to think through all these different things to know that you're growing the right way, right? And the back end, if you've planned right, maybe you're not making as much for the next year or two, or maybe it's only 6 months, but whatever that period is, on the back end, things are much better. And now maybe you're doing less and you're making what you used to make, or maybe even more if you've built it the right way.
Yeah. I mean, well, hopefully you're making more because we increased, but sometimes you have to, I always say to people, like, what does an arrow have to do, right? An arrow has to be pulled back before it can go forward. And sometimes we have to, scale back maybe our own personal income in order to push it to that next level, because we have to make those investments first. And getting ready to make the investment and knowing what you're getting into. Because I've seen some people, they like just start down a path and then they can't finish it. And so then the investment just kind of like rots on the vine in a way, because they don't have the finances and the wherewithal to continue to push through. So you want to make sure before you go down the path that you really know, how much is this going to cost? Can I get the return? Because you want to invest and then get the return, and then invest more and then get the return. I see so many people, they just invest and invest and invest and invest, and they never are getting that return. And then they're wondering like why they're struggling. It's like, well, because you're not getting the other part. You have to do the other side of it, get the return, and then invest more. And making sure that, as you're doing it in a intentional fashion.
Yeah. And if you're building upward, right, you have to keep building secondary foundations along the way, so that your fall isn't all the way from the top to the bottom. If you set these stop gaps by building the right way, by putting these financial safety nets in place, by doing the things that you're advised to do, then anytime you have a little drop off, it's a little drop off, and you're not falling down 3 levels of what you've built up already.
Yeah. And that's another reason to have all those financial safety nets in place, right? To make sure that you have that runway so that you're not starting over from scratch.
Right. Anything else to say on that one?
Oh, I'm sure I could wax poetic for longer, but point is, I always call them layers of poop funds. And so I like to have layers of them, like I always say, get a parting thought is get a line of credit when you super don't need it, because banks don't want to give it to you when you need it. So when you're flush with cash and you're like, yeah, that's when you go and you get the line of credit. Because line of credit is just a different word for basically a credit card.
It's a giant credit card.
It's a giant credit card for your business.
But what it does is it helps you avoid, when you get into these situations where you're a little bit short on payroll, you can then use that line of credit to pull some cash in and into your business and make that work. Otherwise, you're relying on things like MCAs, merchant cash advances, and those are just going to cost you more. And while that solves a short-term solution, it kicks
creates
the can
a
down the road.
long-term problem.
Yep. And the more you have to do it, the first time you do it, the next time it happens, you have to do it again, and they stack. And we've seen that happen with people where they have multiples, and they're out, their out payments per month or per week are staggering, and then it's just really hard to catch up from that.
Yeah, it's a big hole that it's so hard to get out of, and then it creates issues with other stuff. I mean, just like layers of bad. That is layers of just poo, not poo. So we need layers of poo funds. And so, having those cash reserves and having that line of credit, then maybe having a couple like credit cards or things like that, or, other funds you can pull from, so that no matter what happens, we have these layers. And so we know we can be set at any time that it's okay, if something small happens or even something large, because we can outfund any issues.
Yeah, if you're planning ahead, you have contingencies. Hey, what happens if this happens? Hey, what happens if we have to shut down for 2 weeks because of X? Maybe you're in an industry where, you didn't get a license renewed, or you forgot to apply for a permit or something, whatever the case is, and you're shut down for a couple weeks. Okay, what's the plan then? Like, how do we survive? Okay, well, the line of credit is such a great, easy one, because if you do it when you don't need it,
always when you don't need it,
super easy to get. You'll get the most that they'll give you at that time, and then they'll beg you to use it. And then sometimes you can use that line of credit for certain things and continue paying it off very quickly, and they may extend that line of credit to be even larger, and then you're using that line of credit to continue to build a wider net for yourself while you don't need it. And if you're utilizing it correctly, much like a credit card, you use it, you pay it off. You use it, you pay it off. Then you're actually not hurting yourself on these huge amounts of interest, and you're able to build that up. And it also builds your business credit, which is another useful tool for when you need to apply for loans or when you need to get that business credit card or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Yeah. So get one of those when you don't need it. Because the more money you have in the bank, the more the bank is willing to lend you. And so just really looking at all the different financial safety nets you can put in place for yourself, so that if something were to happen and you did need it, it's there and you can survive.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, that is all I got today on the Blue Collar Wealth Club. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.